Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots. I'm Katie Halper.
And I'm Matt Taibbi. How are you doing, Katie?
Good, you?
I'm good. I'm keeping it up. I'm as ignorant this week as I was last week.
Oh, great. Our viewers are going to be so glad to hear that.
I know. I like basically just found out that Cuba's erupting or we're invading or something. But that's not going to stop me from having opinions on it. Like I know something about it. So
right. I mean, with Cuba, it's fairly easy. You know, U.S. denies role in problems, pretends like it's all the Cuban government, fails to mention that there's an embargo, which is especially relevant right now. Well, you'll weigh in on this later.
I will. That's right. Yes, that's because that's my segment, actually.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. I did not know that.
Okay, awesome. I barely knew that myself. So,
and I just want to apologize, everyone. I'm having some tech issues, so you're going to see there's a kind of Blair Witch almost quality to my setup. My usual good camera isn't working.
It's kind of cool. It's almost like you're giving off some kind of weird energy that's affecting everybody's vision, like you personally, not your camera.
Right. It's a je ne sais quoi. It is better than it is better than I predict it will be in our future interview with our two guests, Kevin Gosztola, journalist Kevin Gosztola, Shadowproof, and the Unauthorized Disclosure podcast, as well as Gabriel Shipton, the brother of Julian Assange. How'd you like that? That
was slick.
Segue. That was good, right?
Yeah.
So it's not that we already taped that interview, because of course we do everything in order.
It's sequentially, yeah.
Sequentially, right. So, but I'm getting the sense that maybe, just maybe, part of that interview will be worse in terms of the video quality than now, because I'll have forgotten this trick that I realized, which is that you turn off the touch up my thing in Zoom. Anyway, a lot of fourth wall stuff here, guys.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like who knows what will happen, but that's one of the possibilities.
Right. Yeah. You want to bet some money on it? Obviously, I'm betting that it will happen.
You're betting that it will happen? I'll take a parlay. Maybe we can do like some kind of what's the word I'm looking for?
This is good. This is This Week in Matt Rapidly Aging.
Yeah, this is Matt waking up at 3:38 in the morning today.
For what?
So,
to prep for your Cuba segment.
Yes, that among other things. Yeah.
Everything
fire
okay?
alarm, dog. Yeah, no. Mm-hmm.
Did the dog set off the fire alarm?
Just lots of stuff.
Okay.
Actually, not one of them involved a child this morning, but yeah, no, I got up early in the morning. Had trouble getting back to sleep. So anyway,
I got up early for me in the morning, which is like 7.
That's extremely early for you.
Yeah.
But we had to just in case maybe you had to do an interview of some kind.
Right. So now we're really pushing the sequential thing. It's like not only are we going to do an interview after, but we're going to book the person right before this segment. Who knows who it could be?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So we're going to try to do something that we almost never do on this show, which is interview somebody as we're doing the 4 food groups.
Yeah.
So we're going to start beefing up the concept
this is
a little bit.
Programming.
So we might as well just get to it.
We might as well get to it. So Dems suck, Republicans suck.
Isn't that weird? Isn't that terrible?
Isn't that terrible? Yeah. So let's start with Dems suck. There's a lot to do, and I actually feel bad that I'm focusing on this because there are really important stories, but I think we'll be able to thread the needle with some of them.
I don't think this is an unimportant story.
You know what? You're right. It's a funny story, and people go after us for focusing on the Bidens because you know what? This is a hashtag but Trump segment or hashtag but Trump. But Trump's kids. So there's a corruption story, you know what? Why call it a corruption story? Let's just call it an artistic entrepreneurial story, which is that Hunter Biden is. Did you know this, Matt? That he's actually an artist.
I did know that. Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know that until very, very recently. So
I didn't know that until recently. No.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Got it. Yeah. So they're going on sale, and at a New York City gallery, and this is causing a bit of an ethics stir. And the way that
actually, okay, go ahead. Yes.
Or it isn't. Is that
that's kind of the problem. Yeah.
Well, the New York Post considers it an ethical problem, but not just that. Actually, Obama's person Schaub was also critical of it. Obama's own ethics person. And the reason people are critical of it is they think it's, kind of a conflict of interest, I guess, for the Biden. He's making a lot of, to me, it's very on brand. This is just Hunter Biden's going to Hunter Biden. But I guess people are upset about it.
I mean, this is even for Hunter Biden. This is pretty. This is bad. This is like, smearing your feces on the wall and selling it for $1 million.
Oh, which is a good way for us to fundraise for Useful Idiots, by the way.
Right.
Who?
Right.
Oh, that literally happened, by the way. I think did I tell you this on camera?
No.
Or not? No, I told you when we were prepping for the show. That happened to me with Bodhi. We'll have to cut this in. I was streaming on my birthday, by the way.
Oh, happy birthday. When was your birthday? Sorry.
7/11.
Wow.
A good one, right?
Yeah.
So I was streaming and I smelled something and I kept looking down at my feet.
Oh, you told me this. Yes,
yeah, I did. But I didn't tell the show viewers this. So speaking of this, so what happened? No pun intended. Bodhi was on my lap and I smelled something. I didn't know what it was. And I looked down finally and there was a little poop smear on my dress. Poop smear. Yeah. Have you gotten your poop smear?
I have not gotten my poop smear yet.
Yeah,
no.
You gotta do that. But I should have saved that and taken a photo of it. And then it would have been like a real piece of art.
Yeah, just put a frame around it.
Yes.
And sell it for $435,000.
Yeah. So, but in addition to the New York Post, what's interesting about this is that people like Walter Schaub, who was the head of the Office of Government Ethics in the Obama administration, has said that this arrangement, quote, has nothing in common with a blind trust except that the White House is asking the public to blindly trust some art dealer and a bunch of unknown art buyers to keep the government ethical and to honor their secrets. So, and friend of show, former guest of show, Felix Salmon, said there are 7 billion people on the planet. Is it hypothetically possible that one or two of them may be interested in paying that much for one of these paintings? Sure, but it's unlikely.
Right. And, as Schaub pointed out, the White House made things infinitely worse by getting involved in the situation. They called the gallery and essentially mediated these terms that where they papered over the sort of patina of an ethical arrangement whereby the buyers could remain anonymous and theoretically no one would know who was buying what. But it's absurd. There's no prohibition on the buyer telling, the Bidens or the government or anybody that they bought the painting. And as he pointed out, the instant the White House got involved, that just made it essentially White House business. I mean, it's no longer just a private citizen selling his art. It's now an official issue. It's
weird because I'm almost happy that he's doing it. As he told the New York Times, it's really helpful for his mental health. And we know that Hunter struggles with a lot of addiction. And apparently painting is what keeps him sane and keeps him away from doing things. So I'm glad for Hunter he's doing it. What do you think he should have done? Should he have been anonymous? That's what he should have done, right?
Well, if we were really serious about, hey, I just want to be an artist and I want to make a career in this. He would have named himself. I don't know.
Bunter Hyden.
Yeah, Bunter Hyden. Lorenzo Doubtfire. I don't know what it is,
right.
But then he would have, sold his paintings, and of course they would have sold for nothing. Like he would have couldn't give them away on the street probably. But here he's using his name. It's in the press, and they've already set the prices at $75,000 to $500,000, which is preposterous for a first-time artist. I mean, he's never sold the painting before, so the whole thing's ridiculous. We've seen versions of this in other countries, like in a third world country. I remember there was a thing in Russia called the author scandal, where a bunch of Yeltsin people got book deals where they didn't have to write books basically and got massive advances that they never for things they never wrote. Just similar to that.
Joining us to discuss Hunter Biden's art, curator Nina Felshen.
Hi, Nina.
Hi, Matt.
Hi, Nina. This is really exciting. This is a historic moment. We have our own, sometimes we weigh in on things. I would say every week we weigh on things that we have no idea what we're talking about. But this is a time when we're actually asking an expert to weigh in on something, which is kind of exciting. Right, Matt?
Absolutely. So we're welcoming Nina Felshen.
Yes, Nina Felshen. a contemporary art curator. She was also a Paris Biennale commissioner, which sounds very, very exciting, very impressive. She edited But Is It Art? The Spirit of Art as Activism. And she is an independent curator now, was a curator at the Contemporary Art Center in Cincinnati, Ohio, and the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. And she also was a curator at Wesleyan University's Ezra and Cecil Zilka Gallery. And where she co-taught a cross-discipline course on issues in contemporary art. She's contributed to a lot of books. We'll get into that later. But you know what, Matt? You probably think, right? You probably think, oh, wow, this is a conflict of interest. Katie's kind of acting like Hunter Biden, bringing on someone from Wesleyan University where she graduated. Yeah. But it goes much deeper.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Is it an even more
mother high school friend, went to high school, music and art, now LaGuardia with my mother.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. I don't think that's an ethical violation.
It's not an ethical violation, right?
Yeah. So is it art? I guess that's the question, right? I guess that we should be asking.
Everyone brace yourself. We're about to see some of these wonderful, wonderful images.
Nina, can I ask quickly first, what's standard for sort of a first-time artist doing a first show and in terms of what they might get for a painting or what they might ask?
Well, I think that I'm not sure that there's such a thing as a standard, but the very fact that he's having a first show and he has no exhibition history at all, really no track record as an artist, that in itself is very unusual. But the prices that they're suggesting, like I think $75,000 and for work on paper and $500,000, that all I can say is totally insane. Those are prices that have nothing to do with reality. But in many ways, art basically has become a commodity. And what is being sold with Hunter Biden is not just the art, but his name, his connections, and very wealthy collectors who don't necessarily care about the art itself collect names. And I might add, I was back in the 80s, there's an artist by the name of Louise Lawler who did a work, kind of conceptual work called Bird Call. And it was a list of male artists who were quite well known. And the idea was to bring attention to the fact that very often people are not necessarily looking at the contents of a work of art, but buying a name. And so, Hunter Biden's name, although I would be mortified at what his affiliations are and what he has done, his background. A lot of people are impressed. It's power. It represents power, even if it's corruption as well. But there's a lot of corruption in the art world. I mean, he seems to be attracted to like a magnet to corruption. So.
Right. Just as quickly, would it be unusual though? I mean, what you're saying about people buying a name, let's just say that any sort of random celebrity X, Michael Jordan or Miley Cyrus, anybody like that, just decided to do a painting, George W. Bush for that matter, right? He retired and he's no longer in service, but he paints. How much is there a sort of a record of what those kinds of works have fetched in the past?
Well, I'll tell you,
as like a curiosity.
Right. I did look at, I don't know, it wasn't a website for George W. Bush, but I did see some prices. And they were, and this goes back a number of years, but they were, like $5,000.
Wow.
I mean, they were
steal compared to Hunter Biden.
A steal. And to be honest, I mean, I'm not a fan of George W. Bush. Katie knows that well.
They're not bad, I thought.
But I actually think, even though it's interesting because the reviews of his shows were so politicized that people were not really even, I think, considering the art. But I think he's sincere. I think I haven't seen recent work, but I don't think he did this to be famous for his art or to be commodified by the art world for a second. So I have to grant him that. And I don't think that's the case with Hunter Biden.
If only he had done that instead of entering politics.
Exactly. Yeah.
The world would have been a much better place. Yeah.
So what do we have, Katie?
Go ahead.
So
sorry.
here's so if we could just look, Matt Wilson, if we could take a look at the exhibit. So this is an interesting photo of Hunter Biden just at doing his work, doing the work. This is his creating his opus. This is a really interesting image of Hunter Biden. I'm not sure what's happening here. I should probably describe this.
Looks like he's inhaling.
Listeners. Yeah, it looks like he's inhaling. It has a kind of combination, my left foot energy, but also drugs. Like I first thought that was a joke. Yeah. I thought it was like a meme where he was inhaling, or it has like a cocaine sniffing, but through the mouth thing. I guess that's not how it's done. What do you guys see there? And this is not art. This is, well, I don't know. Is it art? But this is just the documentation of his process.
I don't know. Is that a thing? Do people paint with their mouths? It's not like a Christy Brown type of thing, or?
He looks like he's blowing something onto the paper. Yeah. But and maybe he has a lot of experience, probably inhaling and blowing and that sort of thing. So
yeah,
he's turning it into an art technique. That's my tail.
Oh, that's Nia's tail. Yeah. So this is my favorite. This is called Untitled. It's untitled. A lot of his stuff is untitled, but that's
very common in the art world.
First of all, how would you describe this? This is him. It's a self-portrait kind of thing. He's like filled in with bright colors. It has a kind of Dali, one of his beach things, energy. But if you look, I don't even know, there's a red sun, there's like a mountain in the background. But what's really interesting about this, and it's called Untitled #1 2020, it's mixed media on paper, and it's 48 inches by 32 inches. But what's really interesting about this is if you scroll down, Wilson, there's in that those red things on the side, there's actual text. So don't scroll down so we can read it yet. I just want to see if people can you see what it says? All around him, beautiful things.
Oh,
it's hard to read, right?
Yeah, but this appears in another work of his also, because he not only is he a visual artist, but he's a poet also.
Right.
And
it's in his book.
It's in his book too. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you scroll down, we can actually reveal what's said. All around him, beautiful things, tangled colors, cradled mercy, made real, rose up, and he began again to write a new story.
It's got that good talking about yourself in the third person kind of a thing going on.
That is good.
I like that.
It's very humanizing.
The other thing that strikes me is there's so much red, and it seems almost like splattered blood in a certain way, whether it's metaphor or not. And, is this a reference to the car crashes or, some unconscious reference to that?
Right.
Interesting.
But it shows up. And in fact, there's another painting where you see arms.
That's the next one. If we could scroll down, please, to, right, this one. This is called Untitled 2 2020. Mixed media on paper, 31.5 by 40 inches by 48.
There's text in the background there too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what does that text say? That I can't even get into.
That's pretty hard to read, actually.
Oh, is that a photo of him in one of the arms? I wish it looks like his face is in one of them.
I think he actually uses photo collage as one of his techniques. I mean, to be honest, you see a lot of work in galleries these days that looks a little bit like this. It's not that he's totally incompetent by any means. It's just that, I know so many artists who, if they don't have museum exhibitions on their resume or on their CVs, or don't have gallery exhibitions, they won't be given, a second with a dealer. It's just, there's something very, 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 very wrong about this situation, but not atypical in the art world, So, it brings attention to the dealer, which means that other artists that this dealer represents will be looked at. He'll get a lot of attention in the press, no doubt.
Yeah.
So it's a whole package of things. I mean, basically, he's packaging Hunter Biden.
Yeah.
It's also interesting that in the reviews I've read, there's very little about, they bring up something about, some kind of controversies over Biden, things he's done in the past, but no detail. And yet when people wrote about George Bush, there was lots of detail. And so I think it's interesting to me, and that I'm far from being a Republican, how the press handles Democrats versus Republicans, liberal press, that is, or mainstream media.
Yeah.
This one looks kind of like an axion, like a nerve cell or something like that.
Does. Yeah.
Or a virus.
Right.
Oh yeah. Wow. So that would represent the Biden
his COVID policy.
Yeah, his failure to really.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, maybe it represents telling everyone to go back to school.
This could be about broken window policies.
Oh yeah. Yes, the crime bill. Yeah, Hunter is finally. This is called St. Thomas.
St. Thomas?
Yeah.
St. Thomas
is that his
down.
DNA?
Oh, that's interesting. Is it his DNA? If Hunter, we know you're watching. I'm sure if he's watching, it'll be hilarious. He's probably just like, I was just high off my ass. Decided to do whatever.
I was not going to say anything, but I had that thought. Would you want this behind your head as you were eating dinner? Like if this was like something on it?
Actually,
I'd much rather have it behind my head than looking at it.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Yeah.
That's funny.
If you went to someone's house, would you be like, do you mind if I sit on this side?
Yeah, kind of like we switched around.
St. Thomas? Yeah.
More of it. Here we go.
Good. And this has a what? Miro kind of energy?
Or like sort of a little Miro, a little Kandinsky-ish.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Neither really, but I would say that I don't see, and again, this is not necessarily a criticism because art doesn't have to be innovative. It's not like there's something unique about this work. It feels pretty familiar to me from other stuff I've seen. And I'm not suggesting he's ripping people off, but it's not, maybe he'll develop.
The lower one is kind of like Kandinsky meets small intestine a little bit.
See.
Right?
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah. We could call that Kandinsky intestine.
Candintestine.
Candintestine, yeah. So
the one on the left here looks like egg on mask, doesn't it?
The one on the left, my God, or it looks like, sort of levitating egg yolks.
Yeah, exactly.
I would keep that in a studio if I were him.
Yeah, he's cooking in a zero gravity environment.
Yeah.
Right? Correct. And it just kind of, I like it. The other one is a
you
carpet,
don't like it, Nina?
right?
You're saying you'd keep in the studio?
I'd keep a lot of these in the studio, but that's me, and I'm extremely what shall we say? I'm not very tolerant.
Discerning.
And the other thing is, I think another phenomenon in the contemporary art world is that a lot of younger artists, I'm not saying he's one of them, don't really bother learning the history of art, and so often you see things that look like things you've seen 30 years ago. And I think that there always are legacies, but I think it's so certain. A lot of things don't impress me because they seem very familiar and not particularly creative, uniquely creative.
Right. Yeah, which is weird for a lifelong artist.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And then the thing on the right looks like Now and Later's or something. Yeah. It looks like Jelly Bean. It looks like, what it looks like? It looks like a girly phone case, iPhone protector.
The other thing he says at some point is that he's not so interested in expressing emotions or feelings because they're fleeting. Well, of course they are, but that's not a reason not to.
It's a strange thing to say.
Yeah. But
so what does he want to express?
Universal truths.
Oh, that's what he's expressing.
It's actually sort of frowned on now because what is the notion of universal for the whole world? Unless we start getting religious or something.
I don't paint from emotion or feeling, which I think are both very ephemeral. For me, painting is much more about kind of trying to bring forth what is, I think, the universal truth.
That seems like denial to me, quite honestly. And there's probably emotional denial. I don't know. I feel that sort of could be behind it.
It's also totally pretentious. Okay, this really sounds like high talk. The universal truth is that everything is connected and that there's something that goes far beyond what is our five senses that connects us all. The thing that really fascinates me is the connection between the macro and the micro and how these patterns repeat themselves over and over.
No, I mean, actually, I gotta admit, I was expecting it to be a little worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, the big issue is the sort of the context and the pricing and how absurd that is, and what it takes to, what it means to attach prices. I mean, one of those small works on paper is, I think, $75,000.
Right.
But people are taking him serious, this aspect of it seriously, because I think it's just become the way people see the art world. They've kind of accepted it in a way.
Which I would kind of get, minus the political context. Like if it were just some random celebrity selling their art as a curio, it would be a little easier to swallow, I think. Nina, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it. Yeah, and
okay.
we'll have to check in with you again.
Yeah, you'll be our correspondent, our art correspondent.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye. All right. Let's I guess we should do it, because it's not fair to leave the Republicans out.
Right. Yeah,
right. No. So I'm going to do two really quick ones, because this one's entitled Governor Vows to Arrest Democrats Who Fled Texas to Block Voting Restrictions. These are always fun stories about legislative bodies where there's arguments over the various sides are trying to prevent each other from getting a quorum so that they can keep each other from passing laws that they don't like. In this one, it's Texas. First of all, I love the picture with all the hats.
So great. I know.
It's fantastic.
Like an Onion headline photo.
Right?
Like that's how you'd imagine a Texas government, lawmakers to look.
It's almost like they hand them out at the door.
Yeah, right.
Right. So the lead goes on. Texas's Republican Governor Greg Abbott has vowed to arrest Democrat lawmakers who have fled the state in an attempt to stop an overhaul of election laws that they say damages the right to vote, especially for communities of color. Private planes carrying more than 50 Democrats left Austin for Washington, D.C. on Monday, skipping town just days before the Texas House of Representatives was expected to give early approval to sweeping new voting restrictions in a special legislative session. The move denied Republican-led legislature a quorum, leaving it with too few lawmakers in attendance to conduct business. That means that could not, at least for now, vote on the bill. I know I've seen stories like this before. I can't remember exactly where they've been, but I think when the executive goes to the level of threatening to arrest people for avoiding a quorum, that probably crosses a line, I would think.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's very Texan.
It's
wild,
tough.
Wild Southwest.
Right. This is Bush / LBJ country
/ Rick Perry.
Remember that when people thought he was going to be president for 8 seconds?
Also, remember we talked about this. Did we talk about this with a guest or just amongst ourselves when he was pushing the HPV vaccine, Gardasil? Is that the name of it?
Mm-hmm.
Which is just so funny because it's so not anything he would ever be interested in, like science.
Right.
But he had some share in the
right,
the
of course. Yeah. That's good stuff.
Yeah. And then but he got called out. You know who called him out
who was that again?
Michelle Bachmann, because she shared that she met someone whose daughter had become retarded thereafter.
She told me that her little daughter took that vaccine, that injection, and she suffered from mental retardation thereafter.
They're retarded thereafter. That was another one of our t-shirt ideas. So that happened. And then I guess just so that we can get to this issue quickly, Matt, can we hear Miami Mayor Francis Suarez talking about what he thinks should be done about the protests in Cuba? This is a good one.
And what should be being contemplated right now is a coalition of potential military action in Cuba, similar to what has happened in both administrations, in both Republican and Democrat administrations. In Republican with Bush in Panama, they deposed Noriega, and that country had peaceful democracy for decades. And you had interventions by Democratic presidents, taking out Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. It's a sovereign country where they took out a terrorist that probably saved thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lives, and President Clinton in Kosovo intervening in a humanitarian issue with airstrikes. So there have been many, many opportunities in the history.
Are you suggesting airstrikes in Cuba?
What I'm suggesting is that that option is one that has to be explored and cannot be just simply discarded as an option that is not on the table. And there's a variety of ways the military can do it, but that's something that needs to be discussed and needs to be looked at as a potential option, in addition to a variety of other options that can be discussed.
Yeah.
We've never tried that before.
I mean, all those things went so well. Kosovo,
Noriega,
Panama, that was great. I'm kind of upset he didn't bring up, how we saved Grenada.
Iraq, Vietnam,
Afghanistan,
Indonesia.
Go back to Manifest Destiny. Like, why didn't he cite some of our better, more glorious interventions?
Like which ones?
Like, I don't know. Well, they're I guess he was focusing on overt, not covert. Guatemala is always a good one. Chile also not overt.
I mean,
I'm talking like Philippines, Puerto Rico.
I think they cut Philippines. Those are my peeps. They kind of got massacred in that one, didn't they?
Yeah. So I mean, why not bring that up though? Apparently, the body count doesn't seem to be a deterrent to him. I wonder if this guy has family in Cuba. They're going to get airstricken.
He'll be able to call and tell them where to stand.
I worked on this documentary years ago called Free to Fly by this documentary filmmaker Stella Bravo, and it was about travel restrictions between the United States and Cuba. And we went to this thing called Domino Park. I believe it is a Domino Park. I don't remember if that's what it's called, in Miami. And there were all these, like, she couldn't show up because she's known and she's, reviled by these people. She's actually from New York City. Her name is Estella Siegel. We went there. We were interviewing them. And there was a guy who said that, like, he was super right wing. He was praising Franco for saving Spain from communism, praising Pinochet for saving Chile from communism. And then he was saying how he goes back to visit his daughter. And it was like you could hear a pin drop for a second. And then everyone started yelling at him because he's like a traitor for visiting his daughter. Like, you can't go back to that country or you're letting Castro win. I mean,
people have they have very strong feelings about that stuff. Yeah.
So, but again, if you really cared, no one cares about the people. Sorry, I'm generalizing. A lot of the people who are, I'm going to say you're calling for an airstrike. This may not be about saving the lives of Cubans. This may not be humanitarian grounds.
Probably doesn't take into consideration our track record of success with that sort of thing.
I know. Yeah.
We don't have an extraordinary record of not fucking those things up.
Right. So. Yeah, exactly. So even if I had his politics, which I don't, like, it's gonna, the Bay of Pigs was Bay of Pigs. Now they're calling it Bay of Tweets, by the way. All these people who are like these obviously like coordinated, super amplified AstroTurf tweets about Cuba. One of which is getting so much love. And it's an image of Cuba saying no, or Cuba speaks out, and it's video footage of Buenos Aires. It doesn't even look like it has a big obelisk. Like, it doesn't even look like it's
That's really funny.
Yeah.
Excellent. So. The Bay of Tweets. Mm-hmm. I like that. I'm just curious to see what Biden is going to do. It's so funny. If this were an election year, we'd probably already have boots in the ground in Cuba.
I think, yeah.
Miami-Dade County is so important in presidential politics. The American foreign policy has been kind of skewed violently for decades because of that factor. It's been interesting to see that Biden is he hasn't gone full blown, let's go in.
Yeah, but that's before that was before the mayor of Miami spoke. Maybe the mayor of Miami is going to really convince him. No one's calling on the embargo to be shut down. I don't want to hear anything you have to say until that happens, guys. In case right-wing Cubans are wondering what Katie Halper has to say about their plans.
There's a contingent of MAGA people who are now kind of bailing on the idea of invading, incidentally, which is interesting.
I wonder why.
Isolationist thing, I think.
Oh, yeah. But you're saying, like, even the ones who we'd really expect to.
Right. But I haven't seen like the sort of hardcore neolibs openly trumpeting. Not yet. Right.
Yeah. But what I will say is that, what liberals could do, but of course they're not going to, is, call for the end of a blockade, the blockade.
Oh, well, they won't do that though.
And they're also not, they're only showing the anti-government protests, but there are a lot of pro-government protests also.
Well, what do we have for Isn't That Weird?
For Isn't That Weird, we have a kind of, it's half Isn't That Weird, half Isn't That Awesome. So Wilson, could we just show this article? So Mount Dora man shot down sheriff's office drone harassing him, sheriff's office says. A 50-year-old Mount Dora man is accused of shooting down and damaging a drone belonging to the Lake County Sheriff's Office as it was flying near his property early Sunday. He shot it down. It was a drone. He shot it down because he, quote, thought it was trying to harass him, according to the affidavit. He reportedly fired at the drone twice, shooting it out of the air and causing it to fall on a nearby structure and catch fire. They, I guess, deployed this drone because of a burglary. They were investigating a burglary. So it was like 6:30 a.m. and they deployed a drone to search a nearby lot. Then they heard the two shots fired, watched the drone fall. They put out the fire. They called the fire department. They put it out. And Goni had used a .22 caliber rifle to shoot at the drone twice before going back inside with the gun after he saw it go down. He faces charges of shooting into a vessel or vehicle, possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, improper exhibition of a firearm, and criminal mischief over $1,000. Records show Goni's felony conviction history includes aggravated assault of a law enforcement officer in 2013.
Okay, that's not good. Wait, was this on his property? I'm confused.
Well, it was near his property, they say.
Do we want America to be a country where you can't shoot things that are in the air?
I mean, I kind of feel like the drone is asking for it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I'm saying. Like, it's weird for me to find myself on this guy's side, but I feel like it's, I'm anti-drone. I'm anti-drone dogs. I'm anti all that stuff. I don't like fake dogs, dog robots.
Right.
Well, also, why do you have to drone a lot? Can't you just go there? I guess they were looking for.
I mean, I don't like the idea of police drones.
Yeah.
At all.
Also, eminent domain, right? Yeah, that's what they'd have to claim to be on this property. You can't just go on someone's property and.
Well, that's that. That's
all
when
right, forget that one.
That's when you seize property to build.
Right, but they're drone seizing it.
Oh, right.
Look, we live in a new era. We got to expand the definition.
Right.
But
right.
I'm anti that. So you know what? Let's cut that out so we don't give the authorities any ideas.
I'm with you though. I don't like this.
I'd like some kind of, what I would love would be like nonviolent conflict resolution between a man and a drone, but I don't know how you can do that.
I actually like the idea of shooting the drone. I like the idea.
I do too. I got it. But it could have killed. The problem is it could have killed someone when it caused a fire.
Well, okay, that's true.
But maybe that's why drones need to think twice before droning.
That's picking nits, I think.
Yeah.
But he shot at it with a .22, right?
Yeah. What does that mean?
It's like a small caliber rifle. I mean, if you had done it with a shotgun, it probably would have exploded.
That would have been excessive force.
Really? I think that would have been better. It probably would have been safer for everybody. Like if there's a drone over here, right? Like if you shoot it and it just completely
right.
evaporates.
It's funny how because drones are not human beings, so it's actually more dangerous to not destroy them as much.
Right.
As opposed to, Well, do you see the photo? Can we just see the photo of the and I feel bad for the drone also. It's not his fault.
Really?
It's not the drone is just it's the people behind the drone.
I guess so. It was a bad drone though.
this is really, we're getting into really interesting ethical. Actually, we have to have another friend of Katie Halper's family. This ethicist, a bioethicist should come on.
To talk about the
artificial, like cloning. He's against cloning. It's just in that whole genre of what are we doing today? Right. We can have a segment called "What Are We Doing Today?"
Right.
Artificial intelligence. I don't know. Yeah, it's weird. I was like, there's a lot of like Tea Party energy. Get off my lawn, but like, get off my lawn is different from get off my lawn, you drone.
Or get off the airspace over my head, you drone.
Right. Yeah. Get off my proverbial lawn. Get off the space. Well, again, I'm much more about that. Get off my lawn space.
I think maybe if you didn't use a gun, maybe if there was like another, like a slingshot or
a lightsaber.
Yeah, if you can if you can knock a drone out of the sky with something other than a gun, you should be able to beat it to death.
Yeah, I think that right. Well, that definitely, if the drone had come close to him, I think it would. I mean, it's Florida, so obviously they have the
Stand your ground. Yeah.
stand your ground. This is stand your air.
Yeah.
A cannonball. What about a cannon?
Cannon would be good, like a kendo sword.
You just throw. Oh, I'm talking about when it's still in the air, though.
Oh, when it's still in the air. Well, yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right.
You could throw a sword up, I guess.
You could, yeah. I'm just thinking as it gets closer
and closer. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like, this is going to become a don't tread on my airspace.
Yeah. Don't overfly on me or
yeah.
Yeah.
I like the way he went back into the house, though.
Right. Well, that's what an American does. Hang on, you click pause.
Right.
On the,
I wonder what he was watching.
Right. So that's good. I'm anti that guy getting arrested.
Yeah, we're gonna free it. Let's free him.
Let's free him. We should crowdsource his bail or whatever.
Bail. Let's see how much it is. It's $16,500 bond.
I don't think could we ask useful idiots? I think that's a lot of money to ask them to post for this guy.
Yeah, you know what? Instead, give it to the
Hunter
Substack.
Biden? Oh.
Give it to the Substack, and we will raise awareness about this. Even more than we already are.
Right.
We'll talk. You know what? Let's have. Oh my God, I'm not. You know who we're supposed to have on the show? Who we still have to have on?
Who?
The penis sculpture guy.
Oh right, yes.
So we got to get in touch with him, and then we should get Goni on and ask him what he was thinking and feeling and fearing at the time. We got to humanize him.
They could compare notes. Yeah.
Yeah, they could.
Yeah.
Both persecuted.
That's a good story. I like that one.
Yeah.
Although I don't like the way it ended. But.
No, that should have been or isn't that? I mean, isn't that awesome until the punishment? At which point isn't that terrible?
Right.
I thought the flying drone thing was weird. That was the weird part, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, how common is that? How often are drones right outside our windows? Like,
I know. What if we don't even know? What if they're like invisible drones, like Invisalign drones?
Right. I'm just gonna do Isn't That Terrible really quickly. This is because you know what? It happens a lot with this segment. When you go looking for terrible stories, you find them, and it's not actually all that funny. Matt, can we open the Seabirds one?
Yes, and first check out what the suggested ads for my Google Chrome now are.
Pipe Hitters Union for men and women. Yeah. All right, that was a throwback to who was it? Who said? Oh, Pompeo. Right. Yeah.
Pompeo. All right. No. Headline: A disgusting, horrible mess. Seabirds' plight prompts balloon release ban. When marine scientist Jennifer Lavers undertakes fieldwork on Lord Howe Island, she's surrounded by white sand beaches and subtropical mountain ranges in a biodiversity haven she describes as the Galapagos of Australia. This pristine setting stands in stark contrast to the plastic refuse, sometimes numbering hundreds of pieces, that Dr. Lavers finds in the regurgitated stomach contents of the two species of shearwaters she studies. The contents include a brightly colored, sticky, chewing gum-like substance, the result of balloons interacting with digestive enzymes in the bird's intestines to form an amorphous glob. By the way, what are the chances that we say intestines twice in the same show?
Yeah.
Right?
Very weird. Yeah.
As soon as you touch it, it sticks to everything, says Dr. Laver, who is a lecturer at the University of Tasmania. It's not rubber breaking down, but rather transforming into a disgusting, horrible mess that it's almost impossible for birds to dislodge. So I think in the internet age, every day we find out about another thing we have to remove from our lives. Recently, I read about a certain rock star who turned out to be an abusive monster in his private life. Now I can't listen to that person's music anymore, right?
Yeah, I felt like that when I realized the politics that Leni Riefenstahl had. I just can't enjoy a Triumph of the Will or anything anymore. Wish I had.
That's right. That. Yeah, if only you could have separated that out, right? Yeah. But now it's like, you can't use balloons.
I mean,
balloons
I don't know.
Are balloons are causing
a big part of your life.
Yeah, well, they actually are. I have kids. Balloons are a fairly constant part of the parenting experience.
Yeah, Bodie.
Kids love balloons.
Bodie, I guess dogs don't, so that's different. I don't know. for my dog parenting.
Is Bodhi one of those dogs that like gets freaked out by balloons?
I don't know, because it's one of those things we don't really know because we don't have human children, so we don't really have them around. I'll have to do an experiment. Although
my
I don't
dog,
really want to
my dog is terrified of balloons.
Really? You see?
She can actually see them out the window of a car, like if you're going past a yard sale or something like that. That's one,
Oh yeah.
she'll start growling. She gets very upset.
Bodhi barks so much, it would be very hard Bodhi barks at motorcycles and trucks. So it'll be very hard for us to isolate whether it's but we could try it. I could find it. I could just instead of driving past a yard sale, tax sale, I could just
get a balloon
out. Yeah. But now I'd have
now you're going to be killing a bird. Yeah.
Oh my God.
I mean, how many things are there like that?
It kind of reminds me of like people who chew their own hair and eat their bubble gum, swallow their bubble gum, and then they get these big things, but they tend not to die.
You.
Oh yeah, have you not heard about that? You're not supposed to do. I mean, I would argue that both of those things are ill-advised, but apparently the real dangerous combo is doing one. So pick your battles, pick your vices. Either just chew your hair or just swallow your bubble gum.
Right.
But that's terrible. I mean, it's like, balloons do seem innocent compared to like, plastic things that go on 6-packs. Those you kind of know by now that those are lethal.
Right. Yeah.
What do we?
Well,
do
it was in
things?
that Penguin movie, right? Yeah. Happy Feet. 6-pack thing gets stuck around a penguin's neck. I think it might be Robin Williams' voice, actually. All right. So that was the 4 food groups.
We have a really important show for you today. Gabriel Shipton, who is the brother of Julian Assange, and Kevin Gosztola, who is a journalist. You can find him at Shadowproof, and he also is the co-host of the podcast Unauthorized Disclosure. You can find Gabriel Shipton on Twitter at Gabriel Shipton, and you can find Kevin Gosztola, wait for it, it's not the easiest name, on Twitter at KGOSZTOLA. He's the managing editor of Shadowproof.com, co-host of the Unauthorized Disclosure podcast, and also host of Dissenter Weekly.
Sounds great. Well, let's talk to them both.
Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Just wanted to start with you, Gabriel, and could you tell us how you learned of the court's decision, how you also learned about the Icelandic hacker's confession? Just can you update us about what the latest news is, but also tell us how you learned of them personally?
So the appeal, the Icelandic there was an article in Stundin, which is an Icelandic publication, about one of the key witnesses in the prosecution's case, a witness called Torderson. And the article was about how he had recanted his testimony or his accusations against Julian, and he'd provided chat logs to prove, that his recanted statements, his accusations were provably false. I think I was in the US. I was in the States at the time when we learned about that. Me and my father were on doing a sort of old school grassroots campaign across the US. We did over 20 events across the country, and it was sort of towards the end of our tour. So it was, we built up all this momentum, and then suddenly this huge news came out. Well, it came out in Iceland, really. We considered huge news in the case because it feeds into the computer intrusion, the conspiracy to commit computer intrusion charge of the indictment against Julian. So this is the charge that sort of underpins the framing of the whole indictment as Julian, who is someone who isn't a journalist, who uses hacking and other things to get information. So that part of the charge, with this recanting of the testimony of the accusations, sort of is unraveling essentially. And it was huge news when we were in the US, but no one was covering it. There was no media covering it. It was just us talking in front of people and getting on as many shows as we could to try and bring this up. So it was sort of, what we expected to be huge news. The mainstream media and the legacy media just didn't report on it. So it was a bit weird in that way.
I mean, it was a complete whiff, right? There wasn't anybody who covered the story, basically, in the United States that I saw.
No, that's right.
Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was just us going on this show. Like, we went on Mehdi Hassan's show and, just trying to bring it up, trying to talk about it. And we on Fox trying to bring it up, trying to talk about it. Like, it was just basically us, Julian's family talking about it. And the mainstream media, no one actually did any reporting on it at that time.
Can you elaborate a little bit about how the recantation of this testimony speaks to that particular aspect of the case? Just to remind people what the actual charge is. This is the portion of the indictment that sort of implies that he was helping try to crack a hash. Is that the idea?
Yes, yeah. So it alleges that Manning asked him to crack a password hash in a chat, that's the allegation, and there's actually no proof that the hash was ever cracked or what the hash was even for. So it's so weak, this allegation or this part of the indictment, that they had to use. They had to look for people like this Torgerson guy who was totally compromised. Like he's a convicted fraudster. He has convicted sexual misconduct charges in Iceland. So they had to find people. Right? Yes, yeah, that's right. Yeah, so they had to find people like him, offer him immunity, offer him, actual cash to come up with these statements to bolster this weak part of the indictment. So they're just unraveling. And it's just like it's just another one of these dominoes that just keep falling in Julian's case. From the arbitrary detention decision in 2015, to the UC Global, spying on his lawyers' meetings, on his doctors' meetings, stealing his children's nappies.
Diapers.
The UN, Niels Melzer, who was the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, found that Julian's been psychologically tortured. He's won his extradition case in January, and this is just another one of those dominoes that they just keep falling as this case just gets weaker and weaker and exposes the people who are actually pursuing it.
He was the person that allegedly Julian turned to help him with coming up with cracking the hash, right? That was part of the theory of the conspiracy to do the intrusion. Is that the idea?
Torgerson?
Yeah.
No, not at all. Torgerson isn't even a he's not a computer hacker or any sort of computer programmer. In fact, he has it's demonstrated in this article that his computer skills are really, really bad. Like he had to ask people to help. He asked the DOJ, how do I upload a video to the internet? This is this guy, Torgerson. So
right.
He's like, how do I log into my computer? What's my password?
Yeah, it's absolutely absurd. So no, I mean, he was just there to sort of create this narrative that, Julian is somebody who, goes and asks people to hack when it's just total fabrication.
Gotcha.
I mean, this is the confusion because there's no reporting on the third indictment that came down in June of 2020. People don't actually understand the ploy that was engaged in by the Justice Department, which was to graft on these allegations weeks before the extradition trial in September 2020 and to essentially hackify it to bolster their claims that Julian Assange is not a journalist, but is a hacker. And so they added all of these unfounded allegations. And this is the part of the Trump administration case that is new. Most of everything in the indictment up until June of 2020 was based on the work of the Obama Justice Department when they, did decide that they were not going to indict and bring forward criminal charges. But then they relied on Ziggy Thardarson and did so even though There's all these corruption allegations around the way in which anything related to Iceland has been obtained by the Justice Department, including a minister himself kicking out the FBI because they came to the country under the pretense that they were going to help Iceland solve a cyber attack. And in the end, it turned out that they were there just to collect intelligence on WikiLeaks and Julian Assange.
In the third indictment, what did they add? Because the first indictment pertained to the intrusion charge, right? And the second one was all the additional 17 counts that were more Espionage Act counts. But what was in the third indictment?
Yeah, so I think this is a really valuable thing to do for viewers and listeners. The first iteration was the computer crime conspiracy charge, which was essentially to get the Justice Department a way to convince people it was reasonable to charge and prosecute Julian Assange. They're going after him with a computer crime and not for anything related to journalism, allegedly. That's what the Justice Department prosecutors would tell you. So there were no Espionage Act charges, and you get all these op-eds from people who think they are the smartest people in the world telling you that this is not going to jeopardize press freedom. And then you get the 17 charges under the Espionage Act. And then in June, because they know that this computer crime conspiracy allegation is tremendously weak, they graft on these hacking allegations. They don't issue any new charges. That's what's really confusing. But they really couldn't add charges at this phase because the extradition request was already locked in and being reviewed by the district court. So it was very bizarre what they were doing. And in fact, the legal team for Julian objected immediately on the first day of the extradition trial, tried to get the Judge Vanessa Baretzer to quash all of these allegations because they did not have time to prepare witnesses to challenge the allegations. And in fact, the entire course of the extradition trial, there's no evidence that they were able to bring forward to challenge things. They weren't even able to contest and impeach a witness like Ziggy Tordarson. So all of this material that we're learning from Stundin, some of it actually we could have found a little bit about if they had been able to contest this evidence during the extradition trial, because he had spoken, he did speak to Wired magazine before. He did speak about his schemes that he had perpetrated against WikiLeaks. We already knew he was guilty of embezzling around $50,000 in funds from the organization and impersonating and exaggerating the role that he played in WikiLeaks. And then, obviously the big news here is that now he's under some immunity deal from the FBI and is essentially protected in Iceland.
Do Julian's lawyers have any hope of maybe trying to get the case tossed on the grounds that they're of misconduct, prosecutorial misconduct, given that essentially they're suborning testimony that they might have known was, not to be true?
Well, I guess we'll have to see how that how that plays out in the future. But yeah, the Tordarson's testimony, Tordarson's accusations they form part of the judgment, the UK judge's judgment from early January. So these lies have made it into the judgment without actually being cross-examined or anything. So the judges put them in there. So I'm sure there will be some way to challenge these in the court. Currently, the appeal that's been approved by the High Court, it's these part of the appeal, the US TOJ appeal was rejected. They found in Julian's favor on 2 counts, but on the other areas is where the US is giving assurances where Julian will not be placed in the Florence, Colorado Supermax prison. He won't be held under SAMS. They've given these assurances, but all these assurances have caveats in them. And it's basically, the caveat is, well, the director of the CIA can decide whether Julian has information that might be damaging to national security. And so then we can just decide to put him in SAMS. He doesn't actually have to go in front of a court or anything like that. And I think in Julian's case, it can just be expected that will happen. If you go back and look at the history of what he's suffered under over the last 11 years.
So do you want to go over, there are two pieces of news, right? There's the Iceland news where there's a witness who's recanting would in a world with any justice, right? Disqualify the him and lead
Well,
to
it would at least obviate that charge.
obviate that charge. Yeah. Is that legalistic for disqualify the testimony, or you're saying it would obviate that charge, but not necessarily the other aspects of it?
Well, I mean, I don't know that it would speak to the other 17 counts of the indictment necessarily, but it may. I don't know. I mean,
so the problem that we're running into is that Tredarson's allegations don't form a significant basis for what the prosecution is bringing against Julian Assange. Right. So it's really difficult to say if you impeach him and discredit Tredarson, then you can get rid of the computer crime charge. It's window dressing. It's a very calculated, though desperate act by the Justice Department to try and salvage their case. And that's the kind of action we're going to see from the Justice Department going forward. Everything they do is a very desperate attempt to try and save this from totally falling apart. I mean, already we're in this phase with the Biden administration where nobody who is an official in the administration is willing to defend the prosecution on its face. You cannot get a single Biden official to stand up and say that this is a legitimate prosecution against Julian Assange. Secretary of State Antony Blinken won't even answer a French journalist when he's asked about the case while he's engaged in his diplomatic work. So that's a key thing for people to know. And so these assurances that we're hearing about are totally absurd, if not improperly put forward, because what Gabriel was saying is really important. The assurance that he won't be put under special administrative measures, which are these conditions that the Attorney General can authorize against a national security defendant. There's an exemption. So they can say if he meets a certain test, then they don't have to exclude him from the SAMs, which is what you can be placed under immediately when you're brought to pretrial confinement. As far as ADX Florence, Colorado goes, it's not the only supermax prison in the United States. It's not the only maximum security prison in which you could have very harsh isolation or solitary confinement conditions imposed upon Julian Assange. There's administrative segregation, as they like to call it. That's the word the Bureau of Prisons uses instead of solitary confinement, that can be imposed against Julian Assange while he's at Alexandria Detention Center awaiting trial in the Eastern District of Virginia. And none of these assurances deal with the main thrust of the reason why District Court Judge Vanessa Barretzer rejected the extradition request, which is to say that Julian Assange was diagnosed with a psychiatric condition that would lead it to be where it is almost impossible for him to control not taking his life if he was held in a US jail or prison. That was the conclusion by at least two of the doctors that he saw, for Professor Michael Kopelman and then Quentin Deely. Both of them looked at him. One diagnosed him with Asperger's, which is one of the first times that we've had a diagnosis of that. But then they said that his psychiatric condition would lead to suicide, and so it will be oppressive for health reasons to extradite him to the United States. And none of these assurances deal with that key finding from the judge.
This is the attempt, right? So the latest in terms of that trial, that those charges, is that in terms of the extradition, right, is that a lower court in England said that Julian won his extradition case, basically, right, which is kind of another thing that's lost in the media, just in terms of even the framing of it. And then the higher court is saying, no, they will hear the appeal from the United States, right, on the extradition. And as you guys are alluding to, it's based on a premise full of loopholes, right? Or a promise, assurance is full of loopholes, which is that he could easily be, if SAMS is considered torture, right? So he could easily be tortured. They're promising, it's pretty pathetic, right? They're promising that, like, by default, he won't be put under SAMS, but that doesn't mean that they can't put him under SAMS if he does something that they consider worthy of that. And similarly, as you just pointed out, he may not be in this particular facility, but he could be sent to another one. And of course, you have the New York Times headline saying U.S. promises not to imprison Julian and Assange under harsh conditions, which again, I guess it shouldn't be surprising. I mean, at least they're covering it at all, but they're totally accepting. They're like, the narrative,
right.
the spin.
That's right.
It's like shocking.
It's like, what's the prosecution's case? Okay, that's the headline. I think that's what the New York Times has done.
I mean, it could easily be. It could have been, won't guarantee that he won't be subjected to harsh conditions, instead of serving as kind of like a PR statement.
Yeah. And I think another one was, he can serve his sentence in Australia. Like that was that was a concession that's actually available to, all Australian citizens, no matter, who they are or what they're charged with. Anybody can, they can apply to have their sentence served in Australia once they're convicted. So it's a sort of, it's just PR from the prosecutor's office that the New York Times has regurgitated as a headline.
It's interesting, though. It's almost a confession that the U.S. prison system is so much worse than Australia's, right? Like, don't worry, we'll let him serve his sentence in another country where he won't probably be tortured as much as he would be in the United States.
That's right.
Yeah, I would point to a really key problem. But in all of this, the main thing is that none of these assurances were tested during the extradition trial. That's a point that Assange's legal team makes. This is improper for the Justice Department to come out and say now, after we've had the extradition trial in September, that they are going to offer these assurances is a complete abuse of the process, because they were supposed to, if they thought this was going to be a problem for their case, which they clearly did not, they should have told the court back in September or before then that, okay, we would be willing to hand over Assange to Australia. He can go back home. He could serve his sentence there if he's convicted, or we won't put him in special administrative measures. I mean, mind you, we had lots of evidence related to the prison conditions that Julian Assange would face during the extradition trial, and I followed this closely while covering and reporting on the trial. You had a former warden named Maureen Baird who took the stand. You had a public defender from the Eastern District of Virginia take the stand. You had people who, you had one expert on prisons named Joel Sickler take the stand, all of them giving testimony about special administrative measures. And at no point did they say clearly, all right, we will make this assurance that he won't be placed in these conditions. And the same goes for a Supermax prison. They made no assurances at all about the kind of facility that they would place Julian Assange in if he was in the United States under confinement. And so the fact is that at this stage, before the high court, you're supposed to hear about whether the judge, every allegation in an appeal is about whether the judge was incorrect, made an error in the way she viewed evidence, made an error in the way she interpreted the law. There is no opportunity for you to call witnesses. You're not supposed to put new evidence on the record. So for them to come forward and say now that they are going to offer these assurances, it's very audacious on the part of the U.S. government. But I mean, obviously, it speaks to the way in which we think we can abuse just about any process, and it fits in with a universe of evidence that we also heard during the extradition trial about how WikiLeaks exposed torture and war crimes on the part of the United States government. And in the past decade, we've seen how the United States will attack international legal bodies and go after the governments of countries who dare to investigate any allegations of torture.
What are some of the conditions of special administrative measures, and does it would it theoretically impact things like the amount of time that you would have to wait before trial? Like what are some of the things that they testified to about SAMS in the hearing?
Yes, so one of the prosecutors named Claire Dobbin, it was actually kind of hilarious because she would call it the H unit, even though it's actually the H unit in the Supermax prison in Colorado. And I encourage people to go find this article from Westward, which is a really good weekly newspaper in the Denver area, I believe. And they did this deep dive into this unit in the Supermax prison. And this came up during the hearing because one warden called it a clean version of hell. Other advocates have said, well, it's actually a filthy version of hell. I mean, there's been, rodents and feces and really disgusting things that have been found in there. It used to be a place that they would house the most psychiatric and mentally ill people who were accused of violent crimes, but there was a lawsuit and those people were removed from this H unit. Essentially, if you're in there, you sink lower and lower into these layers of isolation. So if he wasn't in the H unit, let's say he's just in Supermax and he's under these special administrative measures in the Supermax. I mean, one key thing is that they could take away his access to news. They can tell you that you don't get to follow international affairs or current events because they believe if you knew what was happening in the world around you, you could be a disruptive prisoner. So they can limit your access to the news. They can also keep you to maybe, 2 15-minute phone calls with your lawyers or family per month. The FBI is going to inspect every single piece of mail that you receive and or send out. This can also disrupt your ability to defend yourself. This is not an abstract thing, by the way. We have an example right now of a case that has received even less attention, if that's possible, than Julian Assange's case, because the alleged Vault 7 leaker, Josh Schulte, is in Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York under SAM's conditions, just as Julian Assange could potentially be placed in. He's the one who's accused of releasing these CIA cyber warfare materials to WikiLeaks, but there's been no proof, and his case ended in a mistrial. And yet he's held in these barbaric conditions, and he's not able to respond to motions in his case. He's trying to defend himself, and because the FBI is preventing him from getting his mail, it's taking like 40 to 50 days for him to get legal mail. And so he can't actually participate in his defense. Like, the government will respond to a motion that is filed on his behalf, and he's supposed to have the opportunity to reply, and he can't because he's not getting notice that the government has filed a motion in response to what he put forward. So he's under these horrific conditions, and that's just an example of what Julian could go through. I mean, he could be in a Supermax prison. He could also be in something horrific called a communications management unit, which we've heard some about. That didn't feature in the extradition trial, but I think it's certainly possible. Those are in Marion County, Illinois, and then Terre Haute, Indiana, have these two facilities where they put people who are accused of terrorism offenses. But there's also been a big deal about how they'll put people who are accused of so-called environmental terrorism crimes to try to balance it out, because it disproportionately targets Muslim people by placing them in these horrific facilities. But you get to restrict their access to the outside world, and you get to sink them deeper and deeper into isolation, and you don't have access to mental health. There is no way that Julian Assange in any of these facilities would get access to the kind of mental health treatment that he needs, because prisons are not a substitute for medical care, and they do not provide good medical care. That's widely acknowledged. And in fact, Judge Vanessa Barretzer, the last thing I'll say here is, when she made her ruling, she acknowledged that there is a part of Belmarsh Security Prison right now in which Julian is going to get particularized care while he is under this confinement. So as horrific as it is in Belmarsh for him to still be there with violent criminals, and not allowed to be free, even though he won his extradition case, he is still getting particular treatment that would not be available to him in the United States.
That's nice that they're so intersectional and they include environmental terrorists. So it's not just Muslim people in there. Shout out to our criminal justice system for the rainbow.
Kevin, when you were covering the extradition hearing, were there any journalists from major American news agencies there?
I believe there was 1 or 2 journalists that joined from The Guardian. There was a BBC correspondent, although hilariously, and I ended up calling him out for this, this BBC correspondent was asked why he wasn't covering the extradition, or why BBC wasn't doing more coverage of the extradition trial. And he said, and this was in the middle of the trial, and this was a month-long proceeding, by the way, just to refresh people's memory. And he said, the Assange thing is really just run its course, and I think it'll come back around and be in the news again in the next week or so. But it's just, it's come and gone, and that's where it needs to be. And it was really absurd. I mean, every single day there was some new important detail that people needed to understand about the US government and its abuses and the corruption in this case. And I think on one hand, I don't want to indict all media in the world. There's actually been a fair amount of journalists in and throughout Europe that have done journalism around this case. Like this guy in Iceland, Bjartmar Andersson, like the only person who is digging around and trying to figure out Iceland's role in this prosecution, or what can I expose, and what will it say about the way Assange is being prosecuted. Stefania Marizzi, who I know you've had on your show, Italian journalist, only journalist we know right now who is actually pursuing aggressive freedom of information cases in all the countries that are implicated in the Assange case, and trying to obtain documents from security agencies about how Julian Assange and staff members of WikiLeaks were targeted by the governments in Ecuador, US, United Kingdom, and Sweden over the last decade. Nobody else seems to be doing this. I don't see Guardian, I don't see the Telegraph or any other newspaper stepping up to show solidarity and help bolster her efforts to get these documents. Which we had like a half dozen or so people from around the world, more, I'd say there were like 12 or 20 journalists that I was seeing regularly for a month, and some were in Australia, some were in Europe. People like Matt Kennard at Declassified UK, and obviously Max Blumenthal has done some excellent work digging into the UC Global spying allegations. El País in Spain has covered very closely what's going on. But as far as like the day-to-day of this case, as far as like the very dry mechanics of what's happening as this case develops, there are very, very few newspapers or media organizations that are helping people to understand how this case is unfolding. Everyone recognizes the implications, but I don't know how many people actually understand how we're going to get there. Like ultimately, if we do reach that nightmare scenario where Julian Assange is put on trial, I hope it doesn't happen, but if it does happen and he's put on trial and it ends up being that he's convicted and a hole is blown through the First Amendment, I'm just not sure that people in the United States and around the world are going to fully understand how the US got here, because there's not a lot of coverage, and particularly on the corruption that Gabriel and I could talk some more about, because it is extraordinary, the extent to corruption that exists in this case.
You mentioned the BBC, the Guardian, though, but no New York Times, no Washington Post, no NBC, CBS, ABC, none of the American people he partnered with, back in the day. I mean,
I suppose it was too early for them, but I was waking up at 3:30 and 4 a.m. in the morning to tune into this case in London. Actually, there's no excuse for the New York Times or the Washington Post.
They've got people they can send over there. I think they have airplanes.
They slept through their alarm clocks, guys.
Yeah.
Pay a college intern to get up in the morning and tune into this and do the grunt work to collect information for your publication. Because of the COVID pandemic, it was so easy to cover the extradition trial. I didn't have to travel to London in order to follow this case. I was able to wake up from my home in Chicago and report on this. And that applies to every single newspaper. You had to expend a very limited number of resources to tune in and get a credential and follow this case. There is no excuse for the New York Times and the Washington Post to have not had people who were following. They just basically weren't interested. They were, what would they have been covering? They were more interested in the Trump-Biden tit for tat during the 2020 election than they were Julian Assange's case.
Yeah, well, I think it's been, they're almost, watching these media organizations over the years, through my brother's persecution, you can see how they, almost complicit in what he's undergoing. A lot of the smearing, there was the Operation Pelican. So this was covered by Matt Kennard. Operation Pelican was a UK operation that was trying to get Ecuador to kick Julian out of the embassy. And so, they would fly Ecuadorian diplomats over the UK to butter them up. And this was all written about in a book by one of the people involved and then covered by Matt Kennard from Declassified UK. And they had a problem. They said, well, Ecuador said, yeah, we could kick him out. We could withdraw his asylum, unlike unprecedented, withdraw his asylum, cancel his citizenship and eject him from the embassy. But he's too popular in Ecuador. We'll have a backlash from the people, from our population. And they said, okay, well, how do we make it seem like how do we reduce Julian Assange's popularity in Ecuador? Okay, we start saying, oh, he's a bad house guest. Oh, he doesn't feed his cat. Oh, he, smears poo on the wall. All these things feed into this, how do we destroy his character? How do we reduce his reputation and his popularity in Ecuador in order to eject him? And it's the same with, the Manafort, the famous fabricated Manafort story in The Guardian. How do we create Julian as this person who assisted, Trump to get into the White House? Okay, we plant this Manafort story. And then, that just grows and grows. And then we see people like John Cusack, Katie, who jumped on one of your tweets this week. That sort of narrative has just sort of exploded and sort of makes it okay for liberals in the US to sort of close their eyes to this, this attack on their freedoms. They're saying, well, Julian helped Trump, so it's okay to establish this prosecution, this sort of attack on the First Amendment because, he helped Trump. So it's all these crazy liberals who are now sort of backing this prosecution, even though it's not about that issue.
John Cusack, then he seems to be of two minds because then he retweeted out a bunch of other things that were kind of.
He got ratioed. He got ratioed so bad, and then he had to backpedal.
Yeah.
And he had to come up with all the. It's just unbelievable.
And this was in response to when I interviewed. We had Stella Morris on this show, and then I had her on recently on my show, and I asked her this question about how you respond to the claims that Biden, Assange helped Trump. And basically she's like, well, it's very easy. You just point out that all the people who are supporting the extradition case right now are siding with Trump over Obama, who decided, of course, not to pursue these. So that always just shocks me. Again, if you're going to see the world through this Trump derangement lens, then at least be on brand and you're going to want to be siding with rule of law that Obama allegedly was implementing that was undone by Trump. But instead they're siding with this attack on the First Amendment, which I thought was so Trumpian.
Yeah, and that's what, we were traveling, well, my father and I, when we were traveling around the US, we're talking to people saying, this is about 2010, this is about Chelsea Manning's revelations, the publishing of the Afghan war logs, the publishing of the Iraq war logs, torture in Guantanamo Bay. This is about actual war crimes, torture, and corruption that were revealed by Chelsea Manning. That's what Julian's been prosecuted, for publishing the Espionage Act charges. So, it's about, we're just traveling the country explaining that to people because a lot of people are just don't know. They think, oh yeah, well, he's been prosecuted for, these 2016 email leaks, but that's not the case. It's actually WikiLeaks' best work, work that's sort of led to the end of the Iraq War, work that's led to, the start of the Arab Spring, people being liberated, people's lives saved all over the world.
So, I get the people who are confused about that, who, maybe are casual news readers who, ingested a ton of Trump news in 2016, 2017. What I don't get are the people who were open advocates for Julian back in 2011, 2012, who did public service announcements for him, or, editorials, or worked with him at newspapers, and they know that it's the same issue. Where are those people? That's what I'm confused about. I see Daniel Ellsberg is one of the only people who's kind of been consistent about this. Where are the rest of those people? That's what's confusing to me.
No, it's so pervasive. I mean, I was speaking to people, and they just, they get buzzsawed, in their group, in their little liberal group, if they bring up this thing, they just get, hammered down. And so there's this, everyone's afraid to come up. And that's why it was so great to see, what was going on with John Cusack when he brought this up, because the tide is changing now. People are understanding what's going on. 2 or 3 years ago, or if John had done a tweet like that, it would have got heaps of likes, but this time when he tweeted it, he got hardly any likes and a bunch of comments. Everyone's saying, what are you talking about? This is wrong. This is wrong. So it's really encouraging to see the narrative, or people are actually realizing, what this case is about. And they're starting to ignore this sort of, it really does the security state a favor, this narrative that, Julian helped Trump. And that's what it's been used for. So people can see through that now, I think, more and more.
Do you run into the problem of Americans, especially, not even knowing what the Espionage Act is? That seems to be another aspect. I notice even journalists don't really understand what the charge is or what the consequences of it are. Could you talk a little bit about what the act is and what it would mean if you were convicted on any of those?
It's a 1917 act. I think it was brought in to quell resistance to World War I. And then Daniel Ellsberg, he had the very famous case in 50 years ago now, where it was the Espionage Act was turned against somebody who revealed what Daniel Ellsberg revealed, the Pentagon Papers. So then it's been turned against people who leak classified or top secret or whatever information from the government, anything the government doesn't, or anything that the government doesn't want to be leaked, basically. And then it's become used more and more under Obama, under Trump, more and more against leakers. So people who take the information and give it to publishers or journalists. But this, in Julian's case, it is the first time it's ever been used against somebody. Two of the Espionage Act charges are actually for physically publishing, that they're for physically publishing the material. So this is the first time it's ever been used like that. And it's so vague in its wording that you can sort of, they've found a way to sort of game it, to sort of turn around and use it against a publisher. So that's the sort of brief history. I'm sure Kevin knows a lot more about the Espionage Act than me.
And then one widespread fear. I mean, the other thing I'd add in about the history is that this goes back to being used against anybody who was opposed to U.S. involvement in World War I. It targeted Eugene Debs, socialist Eugene Debs, very, very early on. So it's actually fits with the law that now today we're seeing some of the most outspoken dissenters against U.S. wars and against the national security state being targeted by the Justice Department in this manner. But I think a widespread concern that we need to be focused on here, that a lot of press freedom organizations actually do recognize, although they may not articulate it very clearly, is that you could see a kind of arms race started because of what the United States is doing by pursuing Julian Assange, who is not a U.S. citizen. All right. So it's very important to make clear here that Julian Assange never signed a non-disclosure agreement. The way that the U.S. Justice Department has been prosecuting leakers is to say that you have signed a non-disclosure agreement. You have signed a secrecy oath, essentially. And so you have an obligation to keep those secrets from being disclosed. And then if you disclose them, you have committed the crime. So they prosecute it like it's a strict liability offense. Your intent doesn't matter. Your knowledge doesn't even really matter that much anymore. Just the mere fact that we can prove a leak happened makes you someone we can convict at trial. That's what they're doing. That's what they did in cases like Reality Winner's case. It's what they're trying to do in the case of drone whistleblower Daniel Hale.
Isn't one of the problems with the way this law is constructed? I mean, when you read the indictment, it talks about sort of acquiring or attempting to acquire or receiving national defense information. Like the way I read it, basically anybody who does any kind of reporting on national security issues would at some point violate this law, just almost automatically. You'll at some point, receive, or maybe even inadvertently at times, information that they would consider national defense information or that's classified. So it's almost impossible not to be guilty of the law, as constructed. I mean, that's what I worry about with this prosecution, is if they convict him, it basically makes it functionally impossible to do the job with it and be safe, doesn't it?
So to quickly respond to you, they're already prosecuting Julian like he's an aider and abettor and co-conspirator of a leak. This was language we saw from the Obama administration against Fox News reporter James Rosen, who was the person who published the leak from Stephen Kim, who was a State Department employee that was an Espionage Act case under Obama. And so essentially, yes, what we're doing with the Julian Assange case, or what the US Justice Department is doing, is creating an archetype or a model that they could deploy against any journalist that crosses a line that the US government sets, that they arbitrarily set. So you can have acceptable national security journalism, acceptable military journalism, then you can have unacceptable military journalism and unacceptable national security journalism. And I would tell you that you never know when that is going to change, that the politics are going to change and reporters are going to be in trouble. And there is a scenario where you could imagine, the nightmare scenario of people who tune into MSNBC every day. If we had a President Mike Pompeo, who is the one who led the charge at the CIA against WikiLeaks, if he was elected and he decides that, I don't like David Sanger at the New York Times and what you published as far as leak material, he could bring a case against him just on the fact that, I'm a Republican, you're a liberal, I want to nail you. I've got this framework for pursuing this Espionage Act prosecution. It could absolutely be done. So these people who think they're comfy, cozy, and they're not like Julian Assange and they're never going to suffer, well, that all depends that politics don't change and become more authoritarian and fascist in the United States. And you just can't make that guarantee, especially after the Trump election in 2016.
And to hear the rest of our interview with Gabriel and Kevin, please go to usefulidiots.substack.com. Well, that was moving and frustrating, infuriating. I can't believe it. Matt, what are we going to do? How do we get people to pay attention to this case?
I think people around the world are paying attention to it, but it's really hard to get American journalists to do the story. I mean, Caitlin Johnstone wrote an article about this recently, where she talked about how it's this new phenomenon where 2 or 3 years ago, when there was a story that was like inconvenient from a narrative perspective, they would spin it or bury it somewhere. It would go on page 16 under the fold or something like that. And now they just don't do it. So
right, they don't even pretend to have to do it.
Yeah, and there are whole sort of ranges of stories that don't appear, and some of it is a editorial decision, like this, where they're consciously deciding not to cover the story, and some of it is censorship, and some of it is a mixture of the two. It's gotten kind of creepy because I think people don't, when they pick up the news now, they don't know whether they're seeing a complete representation of reality. But this one is really bad because there's zero excuse to not cover, at least superficially, this thing.
How is it not newsworthy how is it not newsworthy that the lead witness, the star witness in the case against Assange, who happens to be a convicted sex offender, diagnosed sociopath, which is an interesting star witness in any case, but how is it not newsworthy that he admitted to lying?
I mean, the whole case is preposterous. right? If they were to look at this thing and the totality of it, from the stealing of the diapers to the Manafort thing to all of it, I mean, it's such a clown show from beginning to end at this point. And they just haven't gone anywhere near it. When they first handed down the indictment, there was like a flurry of sort of legit corporate journalists who said, this is like bad a little bit, a handful, and then they just dropped it.
Yeah, we should really be calling them out. Rachel Maddow, she mentioned something, Chris Hayes, like back in I think with the indictment, right? But why are they not covering it now? Because
they can't, because of what Gabriel talks about. I mean, it's this whole idea. It's the same thing. It's the John Cusack thing. It's this idea that he helped Trump, therefore he doesn't get space in the news. But it's like they already, I guess what's weird. I mean, you asked that question, and that's what I think it is. It's like people are either cynically or they're just legit irrational. Both things are bad, and they need to be if it's irrational, I hope they work through it. I guess what I don't get is, if you already brought it up once, I mean, was that just because they couldn't not comment on it because it's a historic moment? Like, why not return to it to update it? I think you want to be able to say, in the future, when they start throwing your own colleagues in jail for the Espionage Act, you want to be able to say, oh, I spoke out about this at the time. Maybe that's what it is, but they don't want to actually affect the outcome of this. I mean, Biden should be asked about it, but of course he won't be. No, you can't even. I mean, this story is a complete non-starter with basically the whole press corps. I mean, it's incredibly frustrating, but I think it has to be mentioned again. The only place in like big mainstream media that this appeared was when Glenn and Tucker did a segment on this. Right. Okay, guys, that means that that doesn't mean that it's a right-wing toxic issue. That means that the liberal media is an abomination. That's what that means. It doesn't make it right, because people then they love pointing to that as if that's proof that something is not a worthy story. It's like, no, this is a freedom of press issue. I just wrote about this too, and I'm terrified of publishing it. But yeah. Oh, really? What'd you write about, the Assange thing? No, like so the Tucker NSA thing, like. Oh yeah, right. Again, it's an ick factor situation but what we've seen in the last 5 years is, so the CBS, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post, they cover a steadily smaller and smaller amount of stuff, and their areas of interest and the types of issues and people that they're willing to embrace gets narrower and narrower, and they're just kicking all these issues into other media, right? And then what happens is when somebody like Carlson picks it up, then it becomes infamous. It's a propaganda trick. It's just really frustrating. But with the Assange thing, it's especially frustrating because everybody was head over heels about him in 2011, 2012 over this exact activity. Right, when it was exposing Bush crimes, right? Yeah, which is what this case is about. Now they're nowhere to be seen. Yeah. And again, that is what this case is about. Like, it's not about 2016. So regardless of your thoughts on that, that's not what it's about. But people don't care about that. They really don't. They kind of revel in their, it's ironic because they revel in being these rule of law, rational thinkers, right? They're not these emotional thugs like Trump, except they're being that way on this issue. Yeah, they can't separate out the person from the larger thing, which is it's just so frustrating. It's because it's funny. This used to be a characteristic of what liberal politics is. That was the classic thing that kind of distinguished your ACLU liberal once upon a time, was that, it doesn't matter who the person is, let's look at what the issue is. I may not agree with you, right, but I'll fight for death for the right to say it. But what is the Manafort thing? Sorry, I don't know what that refers to. Oh, the Luke Harding story that Paul Manafort went to the embassy to meet with Assange. Oh, it's just not true. That totally made that up. Yeah, they made it up, and of course the embassy is under nonstop surveillance, not just by the Ecuadorians, but by everybody who's watching that embassy. And Harding had no on the record sources, and that was the only paper in the world The Guardian was the only paper in the world that covered it. Then they had
Harding also was asked by Aaron Mate if he had any evidence of collusion, which was the title of his book, which prompted Harding to
walk off. Yeah, to hang up. That was awesome.
Lose connection. So again, you can't even defend the title. Just, you shouldn't have called it that.
And then there was I think it was in Politico, a CIA officer under a pseudonym, I think the pseudonym was Alex Shipley, wrote a piece saying that if Harding's story was wrong, it was Russian misinformation.
Oh, that he was fed?
Yeah.
Poor guy.
And they actually printed that shit.
Poor guy.
Yeah, but it was a huge story for like 2 days. Yeah, this idea that because that was the smoking gun. Assange met with Manafort in the embassy, and they planned the whole RussiaGate thing together. It turned out to be hogwash. So
yeah. And what is the big argument for how he enabled Trump? It's that he did not release things about Hillary. He released things about Hillary Clinton during 2016.
Right, and the theory is that, according to the DNC lawsuit about this, the theory was that Assange, WikiLeaks, the Trump campaign, and the Russians were essentially all colluding together. There was coordination as to the timing of all this, and that the Trump campaign had foreknowledge and was therefore sort of implicated and also in the theft of the sort of hacked materials. The judge threw that out, incidentally.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so that was the civil case, and yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it wouldn't matter, right? If you care about free press, it doesn't matter. It's still journalism.
Yeah, those were totally legit stories.
And also, as you pointed out, they never interviewed him, right?
No, Mueller never did. Yeah, the FBI. They were clearly not really interested in the provenance of. They either know it already, or they know it's the wrong answer, or they don't really care to investigate. So they never interviewed Assange about that. And but again, it doesn't matter. Like,
I know. I keep going back to this, just like trying to reason with unreasonable people who have Trump derangement syndrome. Like, of course, it doesn't matter, right?
I mean, if you take Assange at his word, then his source wasn't a state actor. It wasn't the Russians.
Yeah.
Which, may or may not be true. We'll never know exactly for sure, but it doesn't really matter. The material that he leaked was, legitimate, legitimate news story. There was stuff in there that I think was in the public interest. The judge ruled that it was in the public interest. There wasn't any evidence that all of these actors had planned this out really ahead of time. It was opportunistic in the end.
Yeah, and even if they're saying like, oh, he published some stuff so it competed with the grab and buy the P word thing.
Right.
So like that's not unprotected.
Yeah, no, there's not like, what is it, like a schoolyard rule that they can't do it? I mean,
yeah. I mean, if we want, especially since all the places that like, well, there are two issues. One is that obviously, as we've said before, it's like the New York Times problem, right? Like they publish these things often. So they're in the same boat as he is, which is why they had to focus so much on the alleged hacking. But it's also like these places, so much media was in the tank for Hillary, and I was not in the tank for Trump, obviously. You can't pretend that their coverage of news was, and I'm not even saying that was Assange's motive, but I'm just saying if that turned out to be his motive, which there's really no evidence of at all. Yeah, I probably shouldn't even go there because I shouldn't give any credence to that. But it's just like, come on, like as if those things don't determine when other people publish stuff.
I mean, people have a lot of strong feelings about Assange. What I always go back to is that none of that stuff matters. None of the 2016 stuff matters because that's not what this case is about.
Right.
I think there was a concerted campaign to try to make Assange and basically everything that he represented, which was a kind of threat to secrecy and all that stuff, infamous in the eyes of liberals in particular.
Right.
So this whole sort of Russiagate story was really kind of a useful propaganda device for kind of changing the public's minds about things like secrecy and surveillance, intelligence community, all of that. So yeah, it's an important case, and it's just really frustrating that we can't get more attention paid to it. So
there needs to be some protest that gets on camera.
Yeah. Thanks for hanging in with us. We'll see you again next week.
Yeah. Make sure you subscribe. usefulidiots.substack.com. You'll get really great content for this week. If you aren't already a subscriber, if you're a new subscriber, just from last week alone, it's great. We spoke to Adolph Reed. He dropped some really hot takes about Rodney D'Angelo and Confederate soldiers and the Confederacy, I should say. Also, Matt and I finally comment on the intra-left beef, which we know people want us to comment on. Rate and review us on iTunes. Subscribe to us on YouTube so you don't miss any of the clips or videos we're doing. #UsefulIdiotsPod. And then on Twitter, we are @UsefulIdiotPod. Join us on Sunday live at youtube.com/usefulidiots. We will be doing the crossword puzzle, the Useful Idiots crossword puzzle. So play along with us. And you can find the crossword puzzle on the Substack. Free. That's all free.
All right. See you next week.
See you next week.